John has been with Omafra as the business analyst and cost production specialist for the past 22 years. He is the lead for the Omafra cost of production budgeting and financial benchmarking information. John has a degree in agricultural business from the University of Guelph and grew up on a swine farrow to finish operation outside Strathroy, Ontario. So I'll hand it over to John to moderate the panel.
Thank you very much, James. And I will start off by saying that I liked how much cost of production was mentioned throughout this. You know, I might be a little biased on that, but I think it was mentioned by everybody on that side of things. So it's great to hear that. And yeah, so like we had a lot of mentions of advisors and advisory teams, and one of the things that I'm seeing a little bit more often, and I'm wondering whether the panelists as well is you know, this idea of folks or farmers creating advisory, like they call it different things, advisory panels or advisory boards. Not so much the board of directors. If you're an incorporated farm, it's less operational, it's more strategic. So I kind of wanted to start off at more of a higher level, and just to see how people are using advisors. And Melvin, I think I'll start with you and just ask you, when you're working with advisors, what's sort of the relationship you have with them? Is it you work individually on an as needed basis, or is there any point where you're bringing them, you know, a group of them together to make decisions on, you know, maybe sort of a major change or that type of thing? So you know, just sort of how do you work with your advisors?
So I guess in the last number of years I haven't done any major change, so I don't really I've never had them in as a group, but I do have them in, like the crop advisor anyhow. He's in quite a few times a year. And Mike, I do also talk to the accountant once in a while, so just to clear that. Plus the banker. So, but I know I don't have them here as a group, or never did have. But I mean, let's say I'd build a barn or buy another farm or something, then I'd definitely consider that.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, I was just wondering how I know you've got several people on that you're working with on that sort of thing. So I'll pose the same kind of question to Amanda and Mike as well. And Amanda, you've got sort of that farm background as well, and that perspective as well. But I'm wondering, like, this idea of creating an advisory panel or advisory board, is that one of those things that you've been involved with, or some of those, are you seeing your clients doing that a little more now that they're setting up these types of things to help a little bit with the strategic direction of the farm? Amanda, do you want to start us off there?
Sure. So personally, I'd say some of the joint conversations we've had would primarily be we'll have our vet and our nutritionist at the farm at the same time. And so oftentimes health issues with the cows will lead to sometimes changing in feed. So we'll usually meet with them 2 times a year just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But from a perspective of a board and an advisory board, so I've been asked to sit on one. I haven't quite, I don't know if I have enough time to do that, but I would say, yeah, the larger, what I would call corporations that are diversifying and getting bigger, they are definitely looking for that outside strategic view. Sometimes you don't know what you know unless, you know, somebody points it out to you. And so they're looking for that outside opinion to come in and say, you know, almost validate what they're doing. I see it more in our agribusinesses, so machinery dealerships, elevators, feed mills, those where there's multi, there could be, you know, 8 or 10 shareholders in that company, right, that aren't all family. And so I find that's more of where I would see the advisory board rather than farms. But that would be all. Mike, do you have anything to add?
I don't have any of my large producers or any size producer that has an advisory board. And I agree with Amanda. It is the agri-services people that have them put together. And maybe the farm management hasn't evolved far enough along for that to actually be, you know, be something they look at. So I think whoever the primary trusted advisor is the person that a producer should be. There's 2 things that come out of it. One is that advisor shouldn't necessarily be saying, do this, that advisor should be asking questions. Because once the question is asked, your brain can't ignore the question. Human brains just don't work that way. And then the other thing with an advisor is that you share with them the things that wake you up at night, dangers. So that's the fear of losing something. You talk about opportunities. So that's the excitement that you get, and talk about your strengths as a farmer. And that's all about confidence. So then your advisor then can find the who can help you with the what and the how of your problem or your opportunity, and then both those building on your strengths. So usually I'll pose a question like, if we're meeting here today, December 15th, and it's 2025, so 3 years from today, what does your farm have to look like for you to be happy with your progress from both a personal and a business point of view? And that's, you answer those questions, and that's your own mini advisory board. So it's no, I'm not seeing uptake on advisory boards.
Yeah, and I guess that's like, I have seen it in other industries and other sectors, right? And it is just starting, and maybe you're right, Amanda, as well. It might be the size of the operations, the complexity of the operations that starts to bring that a little bit more into the forefront, or start using it from that perspective. So we may see it a little bit more and more as farms get more complex and larger. So so I do see one question in the chat here. So question for each of the panel: what % of beef producers? Yeah. Crystal ball out here. So what % of beef producers won't survive the next 2 years? Not necessarily go broke, but forced from beef for financial reasons, versus plan to wind it down. So Steve, maybe we'll start with you, just because you had presented sort of the outlook here. So crystal ball here, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so again, I think the plan versus force will probably be the key point to answering that question. The beef industry in general is, older, I think, than average if you look at the data of the census. So, you're gonna, I think, continue to see a number of people retire. I think the question becomes, what is available for transition? I think certain parts of the sector, the cow-calf sector, might be in a better position to transition to a younger generation than some of the other sectors, for the reasons we've talked about, right? High input costs, risk, cost of feed, that kind of thing. But we're gonna continue to see fewer producers across the board, and I think beef is part of that. Where we're going right now may speed some of that up due to the challenges faced by, what Amanda said, for example. You've got carrying costs that some people probably are not in a position to manage. This is a sector that overall has a lot less debt than others, but in the feedlot sector specifically, is carrying a pretty significant amount of debt that, is going to be challenging for some.
All right, thanks, Now, Brent, did you want to try to take this on? Are you fielding questions here? Are you on the observer here? So
yeah,
looks like Mike wants to say something. So Mike,
I tend to be an optimist, but there isn't an industry out there that isn't consolidating, and the players that are in it are getting bigger, and that's the reality of what's going on. One of the things I've always bothered me about the beef industry is just the killing capacity, and that may be an economic thing that Steve can comment on, but without more killing capacity here, not sure, the plants are even getting tired. So.
right.
Yeah,
Amanda?
the only thing I would add is, so I think there'll be forced consolidation. I think there'll be consolidation. There could be a difference in operations if all of a sudden, someone's coming home and it's not feasible, right? The reality is more mouths around the table to feed. We need more cash flow. And so how do we get that cash flow? The challenging part on the feedlot sector that I would say is more than any other sector would be the dependency on working capital, right? It takes a lot of dollars and a lot of operating money. and operating money is where the impact has happened immediately. So a number of our farms right now, you know, depending on how they've structured their long-term debt, they haven't really seen the impact of rising interest rates, but our feeder sector has, right? You know, cash crop, depending, although if they've sold most of their crop, they might be sitting with some cash in the bank right now. So, I think no matter what, just like Mike said, there's consolidation happening. I think but people have to run this as a business, and Melvin touched on it a bit. And I'll tell a little story. And so when we started, we had our nutritionist out, and I was looking at our cost of production on how much it would cost on our farm to produce a liter of milk. And he had all these numbers plugged in, our nutritionist, on value of feed. And I said, where do you get these? I says, I don't know if these are ours. Like, I never gave you these. And the question was, he said, well, I took an industry average. So my question to the producers on the panel is, you know, how are you recording your cost of production? Are you putting it in at $8 corn, or are you putting it in for what you grew it for? Because that $8 corn is actually the true profit of what those cattle are generating you, right? If not, we really need to be looking at an enterprise value and saying, okay, if I'd have sold that corn, here's what would have happened, right? I might have had X amount of dollars back in my pocket. And so I think the more realistic we can be with ourselves, I think the better. I think the better. And the reality is, you know, 20 years ago, I started at the bank, and you know, and I was in Hanover, and I didn't have a client that borrowed over $1 million. You know, I now manage files that don't borrow under $15 million. I'm not in Hanover anymore, but that being said, right, there is a lot of growth and consolidation that has happened in the last 20 years.
Is that the equivalent of saying I'm not in Kansas anymore?
Yeah. But you know what? I mean, even when it goes to interest rates, you know what, when I started, and I mean, there's a lot more people that know this than me, but when I started, like 7 and 8% was normal, right? 2 and 3% is not normal. And so the difference, though, when I look in the last 15 years is, you know, land wasn't $40,000 in Oxford County, and combines weren't $1 million, right? And so everything has just gotten so much greater that we really need to understand our numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. So Melvin, I'll you know, your perspective on sort of the outlook on the beef side of things. I mean, you're in it, so I'm sure you're hoping you're one of the ones that is going to be surviving. But what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good question. When I think about it, like you're specifying on beef, but if I look at dairy and chicken or that type of thing, I can't see, like, they have high costs to get in if they can get in at all. So I think the beef industry has just as much chance as any one of those does to survive. That's just my opinion, but.
And I'd like just to make a comment on that too, the resiliency of the Ontario farmer being a farmer feeder. And that's the risk management, to have that crop that they're growing on their farms to put through the cattle. So, and you know, there's various degrees of how much purchased feed, depending on the size of the operation that they'll go through. But that is the sort of the reserve I think they look at. So I realize what you said, Amanda, that they should look at it from the real cost of that crop, but they'll still use that as a buffer. So that's the way it's been for years, and I see it continuing.
Well, especially for like all the manure we haul back out, that's a big decrease in fertilizer that we have to buy versus if we didn't have any cattle around.
That's right.
Plus, if you take the corn price, like what corn price do you take? You take the highest you could have got in the last year. Like, I mean, you kind of got to take the average, otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah,
Not many people sell everything at the high, right?
yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, yeah, and a lot of times you're looking at, and exactly to your point, Brent, as far as, you know, there's the cash profit and the cash flow side of things, but then there's the economic profit, which then includes all of those. And in the lean years, you want at least the cash profit, right? So that's, and you know, you may not every year be looking at covering all of those economic costs, market values, but yeah, you know, that's sort of the aim. But yeah, some of those lean years when margins are tight, the cash is what you're looking at to survive, right? So, yeah. So I had another question here. This one's directed to Mike and Amanda. Do you look at physical farm performance data in addition to farm financial data to I think it's assess the financial health of your farmer clients? What is the most important farm physical data for that assessment?
So are you, and just so I understand the question, you're talking about gain, for example, and what we're talking
Yeah,
about? We're talking
Yeah, I
about
would
the
say like the
buildings.
the productivity data, that type of thing, sort of
Yeah.
that type of thing. So what are some of the things that you're looking for or looking at in addition to the farm financial?
When we do our financial efficiency calculations, depending on, what the major product is being grown, we'll have all the numbers in those schedules with some kind of unit on a unit basis, and then try to build a database around and rank our producers based on financial efficiency. But then there'll be a cost per this, a cost, feed is a cost of this, purchase feed is a cost of this. Our crop inputs are a cost of that physical information. For example, if you're a greenhouse, we do those all on square footage, square meters. So what's my utilities in square meter? What's whatever. That's the physical data we use at our place. That way, that's the only way you can compare everybody too.
Right. Yeah. Amanda, do you have something that
Yeah,
you're looking for?
so the two things, what I would call the production measurements that we use, right, are cost of gain and just on feed. And we have a table that we plug in and say, if corn price is this is what on average your cost of feed should be. It's a national database, so we have corn and barley, whether you're in the east or the west, and then feed conversion. And so, pounds of dry matter to pound of gain. So those are the two things that we look at. And so part of that is if you can't calculate it, it's defaulted to a rating that's not really good. And so that's why I say, just put it on a piece of paper. Give me something that can show me some sort of way that you can calculate those calculations.
It ties in a little bit too, Amanda, what you said about doing a projection, right? It's like, well, why would I do a projection? Because I really don't know what something's going to be so many months from now. And the next question that's coming up is asking about what goes in the cost of production. Well, all I'm saying is that if you don't do a cost of production, start with something simple. Maybe it's just the feed. Maybe then you're adding in the vet, but you learn every time what else is in there. Eventually you get to a point is, okay, I've got my direct costs on the cost of production. Then I got an overhead charge of some kind in it as well. So, but you got to grow in, you got to start somewhere, but just start.
Right. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And that kind of leads into the last, and I think this will be the last question of the night here, just looking to wrap things up. So looking for, from anyone that wants to chime in your thoughts on what cost should be used in the feed costs. And we talked a little bit about, should it be the cost of producing that, or should it be the market value, the opportunity cost of that corn of the feedlot? So, I don't know if, Melvin, you had mentioned that, I think, in a couple of times in there, but what are some of your thoughts on, what you'd be looking at as far as valuing that feed cost? Is it the cost to produce, or is it the market value, or does it change depending on the market situation?
Well, I kind of look at both.
Right.
But I like to know what my cost is to grow the crop. But then it depends on the yield, right? Like, depends on the year. If you have 5 ton of dry corn, or 4 or 3 or 6, the cost is basically the same to grow it. So that makes a huge difference on the end result.
Yeah, the cost per acre is the same, but then what's the yield?
Well, it varies a little, because obviously if you have more corn, you got to dry more corn, and you got to haul more corn, so it's up a little, but a bigger yield will be definitely more profitable. We all know that.
Right, Amanda?
So, and then for easy,
sure.
I would say a guy could go with what he could get for the crop would give him an idea, but it's not the true cost of production.
Right.
I think where we get hung up on looking at all these numbers, we're looking for the one thing, one number, and that just doesn't work. There's just different numbers you can calculate, and it's the trends that matter. And we're probably a generation away from this yet, but there'll be a time when we do enterprise analysis on all these farms Like in a beef operation, I can think, well, you're running a cash crop operation, you're running a custom work operation, you're feeding, you're running a breeding, if you're calf, you're running a breeding program. Like you got all these different enterprises, but we don't measure, and you got the economics between each of them. So at the bottom line, what falls out is the profit. Now it's made up of a price and cost on each one of those enterprises. And yeah, it all works out in the end. But I think we're a generation away before we actually start doing that. The thing is to get started, pick some numbers and track them.
Yeah. Amanda, did you,
Well, and speaking on the enterprise value, there are so many, and it goes back to actually even how my husband and I started is, like I'd look at dairy farms and there'd be $1,000 difference in profit per kilogram.
Yeah.
And we all get paid the same for our milk, right? Like we're on a supply managed at cost of production. So we all get, so what are those factors that are driving that big of a gap? And you know what, we come into our feedlots and it's say, hey, I market 1,000 head and I generate $75 profit per head, but somebody else might be 30, somebody else might be 150. And what goes into those numbers? And well, this guy's got X amount of acres that's actually cash crop, right? That's not going into feed. This guy grows edible beans or pink beans or cranberry beans or whatever they do. So those are the things that come in. And so maybe going to Al's comment, I think you have to plug in what works for you, right? I do believe that, you have to know your cost of production. And so, trial by fire, right? I'm doing mine, figuring it all out, forgot my inoculant this year. I'm like, geez, now my cost of production is higher than I thought. So those are the things, right? That as much as I do this every day when I look at it, I don't actually do the numbers. So yeah, I would look at, so you have to understand your cost of production. That's a starting point. And you know what? It's actually, pick a number, right? Go on to BFO or Grain Farmers of Ontario, pick the average corn price for the last 12 months and say, hey, if we sold that, but selling that corn is not as easy, right? Like, do you actually have a combine or do you only have a harvester? Do you have to have custom work? Like all those things kind of come into play, and there is 100% nutrient value in manure, right? There is no question. I mean, we bought a farm and one of my taglines is, well, now I can drag line manure to the farm next door. Like that's why I want the farm next door. So those are the types of things that they are true costs. Yeah.
yeah, so Steve, maybe I'll give the last point for you. And I know you're a cattle producer yourself as well. So thoughts on sort of the cost of production and valuing feed?
Yeah, again, I think that, Melvin kind of touched on it in his video, I thought, which was really good about how important accurate measurement of all parts of the farm is and how difficult that is for producers, right? Early in my career, we spent a lot of time, Michael, remember this, on, the disaster program. And, one of the big parts of the program was getting people to provide inventory numbers and that kind of stuff. And I think it's getting easier for a lot of producers, but to be able to do the kind of things we're talking about today, it starts with record keeping, and not record keeping necessarily purely in the financial sense, but the physical inventory on your farm, which is not an easy thing to do, right? And so the better you get at that, the better you can do the rest of it. And I know for us, with grass cattle, like measurement is a challenging thing at times, and so the better you can be at that, the better we've been able to be from a production point of view. So that's what I would emphasize.
And it only has to be small things make a profound difference. So you just build on small things.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So when I see James just popped up there now as well. So yeah, so I think we're going to be wrapping up the panel here. So I'd like to thank Steve, Melvin, Amanda, and Mike for presenting today and being part of this panel here and lending your expertise and insights into this topic. So I'll hand it back over to James to wrap up.